Admiral Kethavar stood on the bridge of his massive flagship, the Dominion's Pride. The ship was 3 kilometers long and packed with the most advanced weapons the Zephyrian hegemony had ever built. Around him, hundreds of alien officers worked, at their stations, their blue-scaled faces focused on their tasks. Through the main viewing screen, Kethavar could see the greatest armada ever assembled in galactic history. 847 warships from 7 different alien species floated in perfect formation. There were the massive Zephyrian dreadnoughts with their energy cannons that could melt asteroids. The sleek Vortan destroyers moved like deadly sharks between the larger ships. Even the ancient Keltheran vessels, older than most civilizations, had joined this fleet. "Sir," called out his communications officer, a young Zephyrian named Veltar. "We have received the final count from all fleet commanders. Every ship is ready for battle." Kethavar smiled, showing his sharp teeth. This was the moment he had waited for his entire military career. For 5 years, the Galactic Council had debated what to do about the humans. 5 years of arguments and political games while these primitive creatures spread across space like a disease. The humans had appeared, suddenly, making first contact with a Zephyrian trade ship near their home system. At first, the Council had been curious about these new aliens. They looked weak and small compared to most galactic species. Their technology was thousands of years behind the great civilizations. Their ships were crude metal boxes that barely worked. But then something strange happened. The humans began to spread. Fast. Too fast. Within 2 years, they had colonies in 12 star systems. Within 4 years, they controlled 30 systems and were building massive industrial complexes. They learned alien technology quickly, adapting it in ways that surprised even the smartest Council scientists. The Council grew worried. These humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable. They made deals with some alien species while completely ignoring others. They built weapons when they should have been building farms. They asked too many questions about things they should not know. 3 months ago, the Galactic Council had made their decision. The human expansion must be stopped. These creatures needed to be contained before they became a real threat to galactic peace. The Council voted to send a message that could not be ignored. That message was this Armada. "Admiral," said his tactical officer, "long-range sensors are detecting the human vessel." Kethavar turned to the main screen. A new image appeared, showing a single ship floating in space near the 4th planet of the Kepler 442 system. The planet was rich in rare metals, and the humans had been mining it for 6 months. The Council had decided this would be where they made their stand. "Just one ship?" Kethavar asked, laughing. "Our intelligence said the humans might send a small fleet." "This is almost insulting." The human ship was strange-looking. It was not the usual boxy design they had seen before. This vessel was sleek and dark, almost black against the stars. It was maybe 800 meters long, tiny compared to his flagship. Strange energy readings flickered around it, making their sensors work harder than usual. "What class of ship is that?" Kethavar asked. His intelligence officer, a pale Keltheran with 4 arms, checked his computer. "Sir, this design is not in our database. We have records of all known human ship types, but this one is completely new." "New or not, it is still just one ship," Kethavar said. "They must be more desperate than we thought, or more stupid." Around the bridge, his officers laughed. The idea that one human ship could threaten their massive fleet was ridiculous. Even the largest human dreadnought they had seen carried maybe 50 weapons. The Dominion's Pride alone had over 300 cannon arrays. "Sir," said Veltar, "should we try to contact them first? Council regulations require us to offer surrender terms before attacking." Kethavar waved a clawed hand. "Of course. Let them know what they are facing. Maybe they will be smart enough to give up without a fight." The communications officer opened a channel to all ships in the fleet. "This is Admiral Kethavar of the Zephyrian hegemony, commanding the Council Enforcement Fleet. Unknown human vessel, you are trespassing in space claimed by the Galactic Council. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." They waited for a response. The human ship continued to float silently in space, its strange energy signatures growing stronger. "Maybe their communications are broken," suggested the tactical officer. Or, maybe they are too scared to answer, Kethavar replied. Try again. This time, Veltar sent the message directly to the human ship. Human vessel, respond immediately. You are facing 847 warships from the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. Surrender now and you will be treated according to galactic law. Still no response. The human ship began to move, but not away from the fleet. Instead, it turned to face them directly, as if accepting their challenge. Incredible, muttered the intelligence officer. They actually think they can fight us. Kethavar studied the human vessel more carefully. There was something different about it. Something that made his experienced military mind feel uneasy. The energy readings were unlike anything he had seen before. The ship itself seemed to blur slightly at the edges, as if it was not entirely there. Run a full sensor sweep, he ordered. I want to know everything about that ship. The science officer, a multi-eyed creature from the Nexus Collective, worked at his station for several minutes. When he looked up, his expression was confused. Sir, the readings are very strange. The ship appears to be generating some kind of field that interferes with our scans. I can detect the hull and basic structure, but nothing about weapons or defenses. What about crew numbers? That is even stranger, sir. Life sign readings are inconsistent. Sometimes I detect a few dozen humans aboard, sometimes hundreds. Sometimes the readings disappear completely. Kethavar frowned. Equipment malfunction? I have run diagnostics 3 times, sir. Our sensors are working perfectly. The Admiral looked back at the human ship. It had stopped moving and was now floating motionless, pointing directly at the center of their formation. Despite its small size, there was something threatening about its posture. Perhaps they have some new type of stealth technology, Kethavar said finally. It does not matter. No single ship can stand against this fleet no matter what tricks they have. He activated the fleet communication system. All ships, this is Admiral Kethavar. The human vessel has refused to surrender and appears to be preparing for combat. Prepare for battle formation Alpha 7. Across the vast fleet, hundreds of ships began to move. The massive dreadnoughts formed the center of the formation, their heavy weapons pointed at the single human vessel. Destroyers and cruisers spread out in a wide arc, ready to prevent any escape. Fighter squadrons launched from carrier ships, filling space with thousands of small, deadly craft. Fleet reports ready, sir, announced the tactical officer. Kethavar looked at the tactical display. 847 ships against 1. It would be the most one-sided battle in galactic history. He almost felt sorry for the humans, but they had brought this on themselves. Sir, said Veltar quietly, are you certain this is necessary? It will be a slaughter. That is the point, Kethavar replied. The Galactic Council wants to send a clear message to humanity. They need to learn their place in the galaxy. They are not like us. They are young and primitive and dangerous. If we do not stop them now, they might become a real threat someday. The communications officer nodded, but Kethavar could see doubt in his eyes. Many of the younger officers had never fought in a real war. They did not understand that sometimes violence was necessary to maintain peace. Admiral, called the science officer, the human ship is doing something. Energy levels are increasing rapidly. On the main screen, the human vessel began to glow. Faint lines of light appeared along its hull, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. The strange energy field around it grew stronger, causing static on their screens. Weapons charging? Asked Kethavar. Unknown, sir. The energy signature is unlike any weapon system in our database. Kethavar was starting to feel genuinely curious about this human ship. Their intelligence had said that human technology was primitive, but this vessel was clearly more advanced than anything they had seen before. Perhaps the humans had made some recent breakthrough, or maybe they had found alien technology and adapted it. Either way, it did not change the outcome. One ship could not defeat an armada. Open a final communication channel, Kethavar ordered. Let me speak to them directly. The channel opened and Kethavar's image was transmitted to the human ship. Human vessel, this is your final warning. I am Admiral Kethavar, and I command the greatest fleet ever assembled. You face complete destruction if you do not surrender, immediately. There is no shame in admitting defeat against impossible odds. For a long moment there was no response. Then the screen flickered and a human face appeared. It was a female, with short dark hair and calm brown eyes. She wore a simple black uniform with no visible rank insignia. She looked directly at Kethavar with an expression that was neither afraid nor angry, just patient. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Human Systems vessel Retribution," she said in a clear, steady voice. "You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system before we consider you hostile." The bridge of the Dominion's Pride fell completely silent. Every officer stared at the screen in shock. This human woman facing 800 ships was giving them an ultimatum. Then the laughter started. First from one officer, then another, until the entire bridge was filled with the sound of alien amusement. Even Kethavar could not help but smile at the incredible audacity. "Captain Chen," he said when the laughter died down, "I think you do not understand your situation. You have one ship. I have 847. Each of my dreadnoughts carries more firepower than your entire human fleet. Your 30 seconds would be better spent preparing your crew for death." Captain Chen's expression did not change. "We gave you a chance," she said quietly. "Remember that when you try to explain this to whatever is left of your governments." The transmission ended. Kethavar stared at the blank screen for a moment, then shook his head. "Humans," he muttered. "They are either the bravest species in, the galaxy, or the most foolish." "Orders, sir?" asked the tactical officer. Kethavar looked at the human ship one last time. It was still glowing, the energy patterns on its hull growing brighter and more complex. Whatever technology they had, they were clearly preparing to use it. "All ships open fire," he commanded. "Show them the price of defying the Galactic Council." Captain Sarah Chen stood in the center of the UHS Retribution's bridge, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched the massive alien fleet on the main display. Unlike the cramped metal corridors of older human ships, the Retribution's bridge was a circular room with walls that seemed to be made of flowing light. No traditional control panels existed here. Instead, information appeared directly in the air around each crew member, responding to their thoughts as much as their touch. "Captain," said Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the ship's tactical officer. He was a tall man with cybernetic implants visible behind his ears, connecting his nervous system directly to the ship's weapons. "Fleet analysis complete. 847 vessels ranging from destroyer class to super dreadnought. Total estimated firepower is significant." Chen nodded calmly. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. There were only 12 people visible, but she knew the ship carried many more in ways the aliens could never understand. "Communications. Status?" she asked. "All channels open, Captain," replied Ensign Lisa Park from the communication station. "Their quantum entanglement network is surprisingly primitive. We could take control of their entire fleet communications if needed." "That won't be necessary yet," Chen said. "Let's give them a proper chance first." She walked to the center of the bridge, where a column of soft blue light rose from the floor. As she stepped into it, her image and voice would be transmitted to every ship in the alien fleet. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Human Systems vessel Retribution," she began, her voice calm and professional. "You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system before we consider you hostile." The transmission ended, and Chen stepped out of the light column. Around the bridge, her crew continued their work, their faces showing no sign of worry or fear. "Think they'll take the hint?" asked Webb. "No," Chen replied simply. "But we had to try." On the main display, they could see the alien fleet beginning to move into battle formation. The massive ship spread out in a classic encirclement pattern, designed to prevent any possible escape. Fighter craft launched from the larger vessels, creating clouds of small, deadly shapes against the starfield. "Captain," said Dr. Elena Vasquez from the science station, "I'm detecting increased energy signatures from their weapons systems. They're charging for a coordinated strike." Chen watched the alien movements with professional interest. The tactics were sound, if predictable. Overwhelming firepower applied simultaneously to ensure complete destruction. It was exactly what she would have done 5 years ago, before humanity's great leap forward. The communication system activated again, and Admiral Kethvar's blue-scaled face appeared on the screen. Chen studied his features as he spoke, noting the confidence in his eyes, the way he held his shoulders. This was a military commander who had never faced a real challenge, never been forced to think beyond conventional tactics. "Captain Chen," the alien admiral said, "I think you do not understand your situation. You have one ship. I have 847. Each of my dreadnoughts carries more firepower than your entire human fleet. Your 30 seconds would be better spent preparing your crew for death." Chen listened to his words without changing expression. She had heard similar threats before, from other alien commanders who thought they understood what humanity had become. They always focused on numbers, on conventional firepower, on old ways of thinking about war. "We gave you a chance," she said quietly. "Remember that when you try to explain this to whatever is left of your governments." She ended the transmission and turned to her crew. "All stations, prepare for combat. Activate full defensive systems." "Aye, Captain," came the responses from around the bridge. The ship began to change. The walls became more transparent, showing the vast alien fleet surrounding them. Energy flowed through conduits that weren't quite there, following paths that existed in more than 3 dimensions. The air itself seemed to hum with potential. "Defensive grid at maximum," reported Webb. "All weapon systems online and ready." "Dr. Vasquez, what's our quantum coherence level?" 97% and stable, Captain. The crew is fully integrated with ship systems." Chen nodded. The integration was what made ships like the Retribution possible. Every crew member had volunteered for the consciousness transfer process, allowing their minds to merge partially with the ship's quantum computer core. They were still human, still individual, but they were also something more. "Captain," said Park from communications, "I'm picking up chatter from the alien fleet. They seem confused by our energy signature." "Let them be confused," Chen replied. "The longer they take to understand what they're facing, the better." On the main display, she could see the alien ships completing their battle formation. They moved with military precision, each vessel taking its assigned position in the deadly array. It was an impressive sight, she had to admit. Under normal circumstances, such a fleet could conquer entire star systems. But these were not normal circumstances. "Captain," said Webb, detecting massive energy buildup across their fleet. "All ships are preparing to fire simultaneously." Estimated time to firing? 30 seconds, Captain. Chen activated the ship's internal communication system. "All hands, this is the captain. We are about to engage a vastly superior force in defense of human space. Remember your training, trust in your ship, and trust in each other. Today we show the galaxy what humanity has become." Around the bridge, her crew straightened in their positions. There was no fear in their faces, only determination. They had trained for this moment, prepared for it, dreamed of it. The first real test of humanity's new capabilities. "Dr. Vasquez," Chen said, "begin quantum phase variance. I want us existing in multiple probability states." "Beginning phase variance now, Captain." The ship around them seemed to flicker, like a reflection on disturbed water. To outside observers, the Retribution would appear to blur and multiply, existing in several slightly different positions simultaneously. "Temporal displacement ready?" Chen asked. "Temporal systems online," confirmed Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the engineering station. "We can shift up to 47 seconds in either direction." "Gravitational manipulation. Gravity wells and null fields ready for deployment," said Ensign David Chen, the captain's younger brother who had followed her into the new service. Captain Chen looked around at her crew one last time. These 12 people, linked through quantum consciousness transfer, could operate systems that would have required thousands of crew members on older ships. They thought faster, reacted quicker, and worked together with an efficiency that was almost telepathic. "Captain," said Webb, "alien fleet is beginning their attack run. Multiple energy signatures building rapidly." Let them come, Chen said. Time to show them what happens when evolution meets stagnation. The first alien ship opened fire. Across the vast alien fleet, energy weapons blazed to life. Particle beams, plasma cannons, fusion torpedoes, and exotic matter disruptors all fired at once, creating a coordinated barrage that would have vaporized any conventional target. The combined firepower was enough to crack a moon, turn an asteroid into dust, or boil away the atmosphere of a small planet. 847 ships firing as one, their weapons aimed at a single point in space where the human vessel waited. The beams and projectiles converged on the Retribution's position, creating a massive explosion of light and energy. For several seconds, the area was completely obscured by the overlapping weapon effects. Sensors throughout the alien fleet registered massive energy releases, exactly what would be expected from the complete destruction of any known ship type. On the bridge of the Dominion's Pride, Admiral Kethvar watched the display with satisfaction. The human ship had simply vanished in the overwhelming barrage. It was over before it had really begun. Confirm target destruction, he ordered. The science officer worked at his station for several moments, then looked up with a puzzled expression. Sir, I'm having difficulty getting clear readings. There's significant interference from the weapon discharge. Of course there is, Kethvar replied. We just hit that position with enough energy to level a city. Give it a moment for the interference to clear. But as the seconds passed and the energy signatures faded, something impossible became visible on their screens. The human ship was still there. Not only was it undamaged, it appeared to be completely unaffected by the massive attack. A shimmering barrier surrounded it, looking like a soap bubble made of starlight. The barrier pulsed gently as if it was alive. That's impossible, whispered the tactical officer. Nothing could survive that much firepower. Kethvar stared at the display in shock. In 40 years of military service, he had never seen defensive systems that could withstand such an attack. The energy barrier around the human ship was unlike anything in the galactic database. Sir, said the science officer, his voice shaking slightly, I'm detecting multiple quantum signatures from the human vessel. It appears to be existing in several dimensional states simultaneously. What does that mean? Kethvar demanded. I'm not sure, sir. Our physics models don't account for this kind of technology. Around the bridge, alien officers stared at their instruments in confusion and growing fear. Their sensors were reporting impossible readings from the human ship, energy levels that violated known physical laws, spatial distortions that shouldn't exist, temporal fluctuations that made no sense. Sir, called the communications officer, we're receiving a transmission from the human vessel. The screen flickered, and Captain Chen's face appeared again. But now there was something different about her image. It seemed to exist in multiple places at once, as if several versions of her were speaking in perfect synchronization. Admiral Kethvar, she said, her voice echoing strangely. You have fired upon a human vessel in human space. This constitutes an act of war. You now have 10 seconds to begin immediate withdrawal, or we will respond with appropriate force. The transmission ended, leaving the alien bridge in stunned silence. Kethvar found his voice first. All ships prepare for second attack wave. Target that barrier directly. But even as he gave the order, he could see that his fleet was in confusion. Ship commanders across the Armada were reporting system malfunctions, sensor errors, and communications problems. Something about the human ship was interfering with their technology in ways they didn't understand. On the main display, the human vessel began to move, but it didn't move through space the way normal ships did. Instead, it seemed to slide between dimensions, appearing in one location and then another, without crossing the distance between. And as it moved, Admiral Kethvar realized with growing horror that the single human ship was somehow multiplying. His sensors now showed dozens of identical vessels, each one as impossible as the first. The 10 seconds were up. The second barrage from the alien fleet was even more intense than the first. Every ship fired everything they had, pouring destructive energy into the space where the human vessel waited. Admiral Kethvar watched from his bridge as enough firepower to destroy entire worlds converged on a single target. But this time, something was different. The human ship didn't just survive the attack. As the energy beams and missiles reached it, the vessel seemed to split into dozens of copies of itself. Each copy was perfectly identical, each glowing with the same impossible energy patterns. The alien weapons passed harmlessly through some of them, while others absorbed the attacks and redirected them back toward the fleet. "Sir," shouted the tactical officer. "Multiple contacts. I'm counting 37 identical human vessels." Admiral Kethvar stared at the display in disbelief. Where there had been one ship, now there were dozens, all moving in perfect coordination. His sensors couldn't tell which ones were real and which were illusions. "That's impossible," he muttered. "Ships can't duplicate themselves." But even as he spoke, he watched the impossible become reality. The human vessels began to spread out, moving through space in ways that violated every law of physics he knew. Some seemed to phase in and out of existence. Others moved backward through time, appearing to fire weapons before their targets had even been selected. The first alien ship died without warning. The Vortan destroyer Swift Strike simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, firing its weapons at the nearest human vessel. The next moment there was only empty space where it had been. No explosion, no debris, no energy signature. The ship and its crew of 400 simply vanished from reality. "What happened to the Swift Strike?" Kethvar demanded. His science officer's hands shook as he worked at his console. "Sir, I'm not reading any weapon discharge from the human ships. The destroyer just disappeared." Across the alien fleet, panic began to spread. Ship commanders who had faced pirates and rebels suddenly found themselves confronting technology they couldn't understand or fight. Their weapons seemed useless against enemies that existed in multiple dimensions at once. The human counterattack began in earnest. Captain Chen stood in the center of the Retribution's bridge. Her consciousness expanded across all 37 quantum iterations of her ship. Through the quantum link, she could see the battle from every angle simultaneously, predict every alien movement before it happened, and coordinate attacks that spanned multiple timelines. "Target the command ships first," she ordered, her words reaching every version of her crew across all dimensions. "Disable their coordination, then work through the fleet systematically." The human ships opened fire with weapons the aliens had never seen before. Temporal torpedoes streaked through space, not just moving toward their targets but arriving before they were fired. When they struck alien vessels, the ships aged decades in seconds, their hulls corroding and their systems failing as time itself was weaponized against them. The Zephyrian heavy cruiser Iron Fang was hit by 3 temporal torpedoes. Its crew watched in horror as their ship rusted around them, metal turning to dust and electronics failing as centuries of decay occurred in moments. Emergency life support kicked in, but even that began to fail as the aging effect spread through every system. Other human weapons were even stranger. Quantum disruptors created pockets of space where the fundamental forces of physics simply stopped working. Gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong nuclear force all ceased to function, causing atomic bonds to dissolve and matter to come apart at the molecular level. The Keltheran battleship Ancient Glory encountered one of these disruption fields and simply fell apart. Its massive hull separated into component atoms that drifted away like cosmic dust. The crew had no time to understand what was happening before they too were reduced to their constituent elements. But perhaps the most terrifying weapons were the gravitational mines. These devices created localized black holes that swallowed entire ships and then vanished, taking their targets to places outside normal space-time. Whole squadrons of alien fighters simply disappeared into points of infinite darkness never to be seen again. Admiral Kethvar watched his carefully organized fleet dissolve into chaos. Ship after ship vanished from his displays, destroyed by weapons he couldn't comprehend. His proud Armada, the greatest force ever assembled, was being torn apart by a single human vessel that somehow existed in dozens of places at once. "All ships, fall back to defensive formation 7, he commanded. "Concentrate fire on a single target." But his orders were barely reaching their destinations. The human ship was somehow jamming their quantum communication network, turning their coordinated fleet into isolated vessels fighting alone. Worse, their targeting systems couldn't lock onto the human ships properly. The vessels existed in too many quantum states simultaneously for conventional weapons to track. Commander Theklos of the Nexus Collective Cruiser Harmony's Edge tried to retreat when he saw 3 human ships approaching his position, but as his ship turned to flee, he discovered that space itself was no longer reliable. His vessel seemed to be moving through thick liquid, while the human ships flowed around him like water. "Engineering," he shouted into his communicator. "Why are we moving so slowly?" "Sir," came the reply from his chief engineer. "The humans appear to be manipulating local spacetime. They're creating pockets of increased gravitational field that slow down our movement while leaving theirs unaffected." Theklos watched in fascination and terror as one of the human vessels approached his ship. It moved with impossible grace, sliding between dimensions like a fish through water. When it fired, the weapon didn't appear to travel through space at all. Instead, the energy beam simply existed inside his ship's hull, as if it had been teleported directly past his shields. The Harmony's Edge died quietly, its crew overcome by strange energies that turned their blood to light and their bones to crystal. The ship drifted for a few moments longer before it too began to fade, becoming translucent and then invisible as it was shifted into a parallel dimension. 3 minutes into the battle, Admiral Keithvar had lost over 200 ships. "Sir," called his communications officer, "I'm receiving distress calls from across the fleet. Ships are reporting complete system failures, crews are disappearing, and some vessels are aging so rapidly that they're falling apart." Keithvar looked at his tactical display and felt cold fear grip his hearts. The neat formations of his fleet had been replaced by scattered groups of confused and terrified ships. Many were trying to retreat, but the human vessels seemed to be everywhere at once, cutting off escape routes and herding the aliens like prey. "Can we reach the outer perimeter ships?" he asked. "Negative, sir. Communications are completely jammed. I can barely maintain contact with ships within visual range." On the main screen, Keithvar could see one of the human vessels approaching his flagship. It moved slowly, almost casually, as if it had all the time in the universe. Energy patterns flowed along its hull like living things, and space itself seemed to bend around it. "All weapons target that ship," he ordered. "Everything we have." Dominion's pride unleashed its full arsenal. 300 energy cannons fired simultaneously, their beams converging on the approaching human vessel. For a moment, the alien bridge crew felt hope as they watched their most powerful weapons strike home, but the human ship absorbed the attack like a sponge absorbing water. The energy beams simply disappeared into its hull, making the vessel glow brighter, but causing no visible damage. Then, impossibly, the ship began to fire back with the exact same energy signature as the alien weapons. "They're using our own weapons against us," gasped the tactical officer. The returned fire struck the Dominion's pride with devastating effect. The ship's own weapons, somehow improved and amplified, tore through shields that had been designed to withstand them. Explosions bloomed across the flagship's hull as its armor was penetrated by familiar, but somehow more powerful energy beams. Keithvar felt his ship shudder under the impact. Emergency lights flickered on as systems throughout the vessel began to fail. But worse than the physical damage was the growing realization that he was facing something completely beyond his understanding. 4 minutes into the battle, he had fewer than 300 ships left. Captain Chen observed the destruction with clinical detachment. Through her quantum link with the ship's systems, she could see every alien vessel simultaneously, track every movement, predict every desperate attempt at escape. The aliens were fighting bravely, but they were using tactics and weapons that were centuries out of date. "Dr. Vasquez," she said, "what's our temporal displacement status?" "Holding steady at 37 parallel instances," came the reply. "We're maintaining coherence across all timelines." "Good. Begin the final phase. Target the remaining command vessels and prepare to offer surrender terms." Across the battlefield, the remaining human ships began to coordinate their attacks with devastating precision. They moved like a school of fish, each vessel anticipating the other's movements with perfect timing. alien ships found themselves surrounded by attackers that appeared from multiple directions simultaneously. Their escape routes cut off by vessels that seemed to teleport into position. The Vortan heavy dreadnought Stormcaller tried to make a desperate last stand, forming up with 6 other ships in a defensive circle. They fired everything they had at the approaching human vessels, creating a wall of destructive energy that should have been impossible to penetrate. But the human ships simply phased through the barrage, existing in dimensions where the alien weapons couldn't reach them. They appeared inside the defensive circle and opened fire at point-blank range, their exotic weapons tearing through the alien vessels like paper. Admiral Kethavar watched his fleet die around him. Ship after ship vanished from his screens, destroyed by weapons he couldn't understand, wielded by enemies who seemed to exist outside the normal laws of physics. His proud armada, assembled from 7 different civilizations, was being defeated by a single human vessel that had somehow multiplied itself across reality. As the 5-minute mark approached, he counted fewer than 50 ships still operational. Most of those were damaged and trying to retreat, their crews in complete panic. "Sir," said his communications officer quietly, "I'm receiving a transmission from the human vessel." The main screen flickered and Captain Chen's face appeared. But now she seemed to be speaking from multiple places at once, her image splitting and merging like a reflection in broken glass. "Admiral Kethavar," she said, her voice echoing across dimensions. "This battle is over. Order your remaining ships to stand down and prepare to receive surrender terms." Kethavar stared at the screen, his pride warring with the reality of his situation. His fleet was destroyed, his crews were dead or dying, and he faced an enemy he couldn't hope to defeat. What are you?" he whispered. Captain Chen's expression softened slightly. "We're what you forced us to become," she replied. "You wanted to contain humanity. Now you understand why we don't allow ourselves to be caged." The transmission ended, leaving Kethavar alone with the wreckage of his dreams and the terrible knowledge of what humanity had become. In the aftermath of the 5-minute war, Admiral Kethavar sat in his command chair aboard the heavily damaged Dominion's Pride, staring at the tactical display that showed the scattered remains of what had once been the greatest fleet in galactic history. Of the 847 ships that had entered this system, only 31 were still capable of basic functions. The rest were destroyed, missing, or drifting as lifeless hulks in space. The human vessel, still split into dozens of identical copies, moved among the wreckage like a predator examining its prey, but there was no aggression in its movements now, only a strange kind of patience, as if it was waiting for something. "Sir," said his communications officer, voice shaking, "the human ship is broadcasting on all frequencies. They're offering medical assistance to our survivors." Kethavar almost laughed at the absurdity. The same beings who had just destroyed his fleet were now offering to help the wounded. It was either the height of arrogance or genuine compassion, and he wasn't sure which possibility frightened him more. "Accept their offer," he said quietly. "Our people are dying." As if summoned by his words, smaller craft began emerging from the human vessels. These ships were even stranger than their parent vessel, looking more like living creatures than machines. They moved through space with organic grace, their hulls shifting and flowing as they approached the damaged alien ships. Commander Veltar, barely alive in the medical bay with severe burns from a console explosion, watched through the medical bay's viewports as one of the human rescue craft approached. The ship seemed to melt through the hull of the Dominion's Pride without damaging it, passing through solid matter as if it wasn't there. Figures in environmental suits emerged from the rescue craft, but even through their protective gear, Veltar could see that they moved wrong. Too fluid, too coordinated, like parts of a single organism rather than individual beings. When they spoke to the medical staff, their voices carried harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in the listeners' minds. "We are here to help," said the lead figure, a human female whose suit carried no visible technology yet somehow allowed her to breathe in vacuum. "We have medical technologies that can treat your injuries, but we need your permission first." The Zephyrian medical officer, Dr. Sekthon, looked up from a dying patient. What kind of medical technologies? Quantum cellular reconstruction, the human replied simply. We can repair damage at the molecular level, reverse aging effects from our temporal weapons, and even restore crew members who were partially phased into other dimensions. Dr. Sekthon stared at her. Such technologies were pure theory, discussed in advanced scientific journals but never actually implemented. That's impossible. The power requirements alone would be enormous. The human woman tilted her head slightly. Power is not a limitation for us anymore. May we begin? Within hours, the impossible became routine. Human medical teams moved through the surviving alien ships, performing miracles that violated everything. The galactic species thought they knew about science. Crew members who had been aged to death by temporal weapons were restored to their prime. Soldiers who had been partially dissolved by quantum disruptors were made whole again. Even some who had died in the attack were brought back to life, their consciousness retrieved from quantum storage fields. But with each impossible cure came new questions and growing horror at what humanity had become. Captain Chen materialized on the bridge of the Dominion's Pride without warning, her form shifting from translucent to solid as she stepped out of what appeared to be empty air. She wore no environmental suit, yet breathed normally in the alien atmosphere. Her eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire universes. Admiral Kethvar, she said, inclining her head respectfully. May I join you? Kethvar gestured to a chair, though he noticed she didn't actually sit so much as float slightly above the seat. Captain Chen, I find myself with many questions. I imagine you do, she replied. 5 years ago, I would have had the same questions. 5 years? Kethvar frowned. What happened 5 years ago? Chen smiled sadly. First contact. The day your people decided we were too dangerous to be allowed to develop freely. She waved her hand, and the air above them shimmered with images. Kethvar saw scenes of early contact between humans and galactic species, the cautious meetings, the gradual realization that humans were different from other spacefaring races. Your Galactic Council made a decision, Chen continued. Humanity needed to be contained, controlled, limited. You thought we were primitive and aggressive. You were right about the aggressive part, but you misunderstood what primitive meant to us. The images changed, showing human scientists working frantically in laboratories, engineers designing impossible machines, philosophers debating the nature of consciousness itself. When we learned that the galaxy saw us as a threat to be managed, rather than a species to be welcomed, some of us decided to prove you right, Chen said. If you were going to treat us as dangerous, we would become dangerous. If you thought our technology was primitive, we would advance beyond your ability to understand. But this is impossible, Kethvar protested. Technology doesn't advance this quickly. It takes thousands of years to develop the kind of capabilities I've seen today. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. Time is just another dimension, Admiral. Once you understand how to move through it properly, development becomes much faster. We compress centuries of research into months, borrowed discoveries from future timelines, and shared knowledge across parallel dimensions. She gestured again, and new images appeared. Kethvar saw human volunteers undergoing procedures that seemed to merge them with machines. Their consciousness expanded beyond the limits of organic brains. He watched as entire research facilities phased in and out of reality, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The key breakthrough was consciousness transfer, Chen explained. When we learned to digitize human awareness and merge it with quantum computer systems, we became something new. Not just humans using advanced technology, but humans who had become the technology. Kethvar felt a chill run through his scaled hide. You're no longer purely biological? We're still human, Chen assured him, but we're also more than human. Our minds exist partially in quantum space, allowing us to think faster, share knowledge instantly, and perceive reality from multiple perspectives simultaneously. The images shifted to show the construction of ships like the Retribution. But, instead of being built in shipyards, they seemed to grow like living things, their hulls forming from crystallized mathematics and engines powered by controlled paradoxes. Each ship in our new fleet is both a vessel and a crew member, Chen continued. The distinction between pilot and vehicle, between thought and action, has become meaningless. When I decided to fire our weapons, the ship fired them. When I needed to exist in multiple locations, the ship created multiple versions of itself. And the weapons themselves? Kethavar asked, though he dreaded the answer. Side effects of our dimensional manipulation abilities, Chen replied casually. When you can move freely through time, temporal weapons become simple. When you understand quantum mechanics at a fundamental level, matter manipulation is elementary. When consciousness itself becomes malleable, the line between reality and possibility disappears. Kethavar thought about the ships that had simply vanished, the crews that had been aged to death, the vessels that had fallen apart at the molecular level. We never had a chance, did we? No, Chen said gently. But that wasn't the point. This battle was never about military victory. It was about sending a message. She stood, her form beginning to become translucent again. Admiral, I need you to understand something very important. What you faced today was just one ship, crewed by 12 volunteers. A prototype, really, testing technologies that most humans still find theoretical. Kethavar felt his blood chill. Just a prototype? We've built others since then, Chen continued. Bigger ones, more advanced ones. Ships that exist entirely outside normal space-time, vessels that can be in multiple star systems simultaneously, craft that can rewrite the laws of physics in their immediate vicinity. The images above them changed one final time, showing massive construction projects in Earth's solar system. But these weren't being built on planets or in space stations. They were being constructed in folded dimensions, existing in pockets of controlled space-time that defied conventional understanding. The retribution was our way of saying hello, Chen explained. The fleet we're building now is our way of saying goodbye to the old rules of galactic civilization. She began to fade, her form becoming more and more translucent. You have a choice to make, Admiral. You can return to the Galactic Council and tell them what happened here. Help them understand that the universe has changed. Or you can try to hide this, pretend it didn't happen, and wait for them to discover the truth themselves. What truth? Kethavar asked. Chen's smile was sad but determined. That humanity doesn't need the galaxy's permission to exist anymore. We've become something new, something that doesn't fit into the old categories. We are not the primitive species you first encountered, and we're not going to be contained or controlled by anyone. Her form was almost completely transparent now, but her voice remained clear. The age of galactic councils and elder races is ending, Admiral. The age of true, spacefaring civilizations is beginning. Humanity just graduated to a level of existence that most species never reach. And if the Council tries to stop you again? Kethavar asked. The last thing he saw before she vanished completely was Chen's eyes, filled with infinite depth and impossible knowledge. Then they'll discover that this was us being merciful, her voice echoed in the empty air. Next time we might not be in such a generous mood. Kethavar sat alone on his ruined bridge, surrounded by the evidence of humanity's transformation. Around him, his crew worked to repair their damaged ship with the help of human rescue teams who casually violated the laws of physics with every action. Through the viewports, he could see the human vessels beginning to merge back together, the dozens of copies flowing into each other like drops of water combining. Soon, there was only one ship again, dark and sleek against the stars. It's impossible. Energies contained but not hidden. As he watched, the retribution began to fade from normal space, shifting into dimensions that his sensors couldn't detect. Within moments, it was gone completely, leaving only empty space and the wreckage of the greatest fleet ever assembled. Kethavar activated his personal log and began to record his report, knowing that his words would change the galaxy forever. The Galactic Council needed to know what humanity had become, what they had forced humanity to become. The universe had just gained a new apex predator, and it wore a human face. 3 weeks after the Battle of Kepler 442, as historians would later call it, Emergency sessions were being held in council chambers across the galaxy. The few surviving ships from Admiral Kethvar's fleet had limped home carrying impossible stories of human technology that defied every known law of physics. On Zephyria Prime, the blue-scaled leaders of the hegemony sat in stunned silence as they listened to Admiral Kethvar's full report. The recording had been transmitted to every member world of the Galactic Council, and everywhere the reaction was the same: disbelief, followed by terror, followed by desperate attempts to understand what humanity had become. "You claim," said High Admiral Venetok, his voice carefully controlled, "that a single human vessel destroyed 800 ships in 5 minutes using weapons that manipulate time itself?" Kethvar, his scales still bearing scars from the battle, nodded grimly. "I claim nothing, sir. I simply report what I witnessed. The humans have evolved beyond our ability to comprehend or combat them." In the great assembly hall of the Keltharan Collective, ancient beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia struggled to process information that challenged their most fundamental beliefs about the universe. The Keltharans had seen the rise and fall of 100 civilizations, but nothing like this. "The quantum energy readings are impossible," declared Science Prime Thalanis, her 4 arms gesturing at holographic displays showing data from the battle. "Matter cannot exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously while maintaining coherence." "And yet it did," replied Council Prime Jekthon. "The evidence is undeniable. Somehow, in the span of 5 years, humanity has achieved technological transcendence." Similar scenes played out on Vorta, on Nexus Central, and on every world that belonged to the Galactic Council. The most advanced civilizations in known space found themselves confronting the reality that they were no longer the apex species they had believed themselves to be. But nowhere was the shock greater than in the Council's central chambers on the neutral world of Concordia. Here, representatives from all member species gathered in an emergency session that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Ambassador Seklan of the Zephyrian hegemony stood before the assembled delegates, her voice carrying across the vast chamber as she read from Admiral Kethvar's official report. The human vessel demonstrated capabilities including but not limited to temporal manipulation, quantum duplication, dimensional phasing, matter-energy conversion, consciousness, transfer, and gravitational control, she announced. These technologies appear to be integrated at such a fundamental level that the distinction between ship, crew, and weapon has become meaningless. A ripple of unease passed through the assembly. These were the leaders of civilizations that had ruled space for thousands of years, beings who considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic evolution. The idea that a species they had dismissed as primitive could surpass them so completely was almost impossible to accept. "Surely," called out Ambassador Velcris of the Nexus Collective, "there must be some explanation. Perhaps they discovered ancient technology or made contact with beings from outside our galaxy?" Ambassador Seklan consulted her notes. According to Captain Chen of the human vessel, all technological developments were achieved independently by humanity in response to our containment protocols. She specifically stated that their advancement was a direct result of our decision to treat them as a threat. The chamber fell silent. Every delegate understood the implication. By attempting to contain humanity, the Galactic Council had inadvertently forced them to become exactly the kind of existential threat they had feared. "Hi," Councillor Mordeth, the ancient Keltharan who had led the council for over 2 centuries, rose slowly from his ceremonial throne. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of ages. "Then we have created our own destroyer," he said simply. "In our arrogance, we sought to limit a species we did not understand, and in doing so, we forced them to transcend our ability to limit them." Meanwhile, in the Sol system, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. Admiral Maria Torres stood on the observation deck of Orbital Station Alpha, looking out at sights that would have driven the Galactic Council to despair. Floating in Earth's orbit were shapes that hurt to look at directly. Ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, their hulls folded through space-time in ways that made them appear larger inside than outside. Some vessels seemed to be built from crystallized mathematics, their surfaces covered in equations that rearranged themselves as the observer watched. Others appeared to be constructed from controlled paradoxes, existing and not existing in perfect balance. "How many are operational?" asked General Harrison Clark, the head of Human Defense Command. "Difficult to say," Torres replied, consulting a tablet that displayed information in languages that hadn't existed a year ago. When your ships can exist in multiple realities simultaneously, counting becomes somewhat subjective. Conservative estimate, we have approximately 100 vessels of Retribution class or better. And the crews? That's where it gets interesting, Torres said. We have about 12,000 volunteers who have undergone consciousness transfer. But since each transferred individual can operate multiple ship instances across different dimensional matrices, our effective crew capacity is roughly 50 times that number. General Clark shook his head in amazement. Even 3 years ago, he had been commanding conventional human fleets with metal ships and chemical rockets. Now he was overseeing a force that could rewrite reality itself. "Any word from the Galactic Council?" he asked. "Several messages," Torres replied with a slight smile. "Most of them variations on, 'Please don't hurt us.' The Zephyrians have offered to surrender their entire territory to human administration. The Keltherans want to know if we're interested in ruling the galaxy directly. The Nexus Collective has asked if we need anything and would like them to evacuate their space entirely." And our response? Torres activated a holographic display showing the message that had been transmitted across the galaxy on all known frequencies. The image showed Captain Chen, but not as she had appeared during the battle. This version of her seemed more human, more approachable, though her eyes still held depths that suggested vast knowledge. "People of the galaxy," the recording began, "this is Captain Sarah Chen, speaking on behalf of the United Human Systems. Recent events have made it clear that our species has evolved beyond the parameters originally established for galactic interaction." The message continued, outlining humanity's position with diplomatic precision. "We wish to make several points clear. First, humanity bears no ill will toward any galactic species. Our recent technological advancement was a response to perceived threats, not an expression of inherent aggression. Second, we have no desire to rule or dominate other civilizations. We seek peaceful coexistence based on mutual respect, rather than the hierarchical structures that have previously defined galactic politics. Third, and most importantly, humanity will not be contained, controlled, or limited by any external authority. We have become something new, and we will determine our own path forward." The recording paused, and Chen's expression grew more serious. "However, let us be equally clear about the consequences of future aggression. The fleet that Admiral Kethavar encountered was a single prototype vessel. We have since constructed others, and our capabilities continue to expand." General Clark watched the familiar recording with mixed feelings. Part of him was proud of what humanity had achieved, but another part mourned what they had lost in the process. The volunteers who underwent consciousness transfer were still human, but they were also something more and perhaps something less. "Any regrets?" Torres asked, as if reading his thoughts. "About becoming more than human?" "Sometimes," Clark admitted. "About making sure nobody can ever threaten humanity again?" "Never." The holographic message continued. "To those civilizations that approach us in peace, we offer friendship, trade, and the sharing of knowledge. To those that attempt to restrict our growth or threaten our people, we offer a simple warning. Remember what happened to the greatest fleet ever assembled when it tried to contain us." As the message ended, Clark noticed movement in the orbital, shipyards visible through the station's massive windows. New shapes were taking form there, vessels that made the Retribution look primitive by comparison. These ships existed in so many dimensions simultaneously that their true size was impossible to calculate. "What are those?" he asked. "The next generation," Torres replied. "Ships that don't just manipulate space-time but actually exist outside it entirely. Vessels that can be in every star system simultaneously, or focus their entire mass into a single point when needed." "Do we really need that much power?" Torres considered the question carefully. "Need? Probably not. But want? Absolutely. We've learned what happens when you let other species decide your limitations for you. From now on, humanity sets its own boundaries. Across the galaxy, the response to humanity's message was swift and unanimous. The Galactic Council voted to dissolve itself within hours of receiving the transmission. Individual species began sending diplomatic envoys to Earth, each one hoping to establish favorable relations with the new apex power. On Zephyria Prime, Admiral Kethavar found himself appointed as his species' first ambassador to humanity. As he prepared for the journey to Earth, he reflected on how completely the universe had changed. 5 years ago, humans had been primitive creatures, barely capable of interstellar travel. Now they were beings of such power that entire civilizations restructured themselves to avoid offending them. It was the most dramatic shift in galactic politics in recorded history. But perhaps most remarkably, the humans seemed genuinely uninterested in conquest or domination. They had achieved godlike power and chosen to use it primarily for defense and exploration. It was a level of restraint that impressed even their former enemies. As Kethavar's ship approached the Sol system, he marveled at what he saw. Human vessels moved through space like living art, their impossible geometries creating beauty even as they demonstrated unimaginable power. Space stations existed in folded dimensions, appearing as small points from outside but containing volumes larger than planets, and at the center of it all was Earth, the blue world that had spawned a species capable of transcending every limitation the universe could impose. When he finally met with human representatives, Kethavar was surprised to find them still recognizably human despite their transformation. They spoke of art and philosophy, of exploration and discovery, of dreams that spanned galaxies and lifetimes that might last forever. "We never wanted to be your enemies," Captain Chen told him during their first meeting. "We just wanted to be left alone to grow and learn. When you forced us to choose between limitation and transcendence, we chose transcendence." "And now?" Kethavar asked. Chen smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the human she had been before consciousness transfer, before quantum enhancement, before becoming something that existed across multiple realities. "Now we explore," she said simply. "The galaxy is vast, and beyond it lie other galaxies, other dimensions, other forms of existence we haven't even imagined yet. Humanity is just getting started." As Kethavar left that meeting, he carried with him a new understanding of what his species and others had encountered. They hadn't just faced advanced technology or superior weapons. They had confronted a species that had chosen evolution over stagnation, growth over safety, and possibility over limitation. The age of the Galactic Council was over. The age of humanity had begun, and across the cosmos, ancient civilizations adapted to a new reality. They were no longer alone at the top of the universal hierarchy. Something new, something that had once been human, but was now much more, was reaching toward stars they had never dared to explore. The message had been sent and received. Humanity would not be contained.